Running feels great. It's a beautiful sense of freedom and independence. At age 17, I was registered legally blind. I lost my sight through RP, which is a degenerative disorder of the retina, and you just lose vision over time from the peripheral through to the centre. I started running because I was broke. I needed something to do. I figured running could be cheap. So I went outside with the only pair of shoes I owned and started running. One day I built up enough confidence to step out onto the open road and just run down a dual carriageway. Just had to tell myself that cars will move. Thankfully they did. Got to the end and overcome with emotion, I just cried. I often see technology as an opportunity. A new piece of technology always opens up a new possibility. Okay, Glass. Google, what time is it?
The time is 4:20 p.m.
Initially, Glass for me gave me the sense that Glass can see, and I can't. Maybe this technology can fill in the gaps. Okay, Glass, start a run. Now I can just ask Glass directions to where I want to go.
Turn left.
And receive audio feedback. It's not a replacement for my eyes, but certainly something that can assist and act as a level of vision. Okay. Really allow me to share moments with the children, with a wide audience of family and friends. Okay, Glass, take a photo. Share with family. My next big challenge is to run from Boston to New York and then compete in the New York Marathon for a total of around 260 miles. And I'll be documenting it along the way with Glass. My name is Simon Wheatcroft. I'm an ultramarathon runner, father, and Glass explorer. My story didn't start with the technology. My story started in California with an idea to climb a mountain. The idea was I'd reach the top, I'd propose to my girlfriend, and I'd create a magical moment. So early one morning, me and my girlfriend set out at the base of a mountain and quickly got lost, which seemed really strange because my girlfriend can see. And there was a mountain. I still struggle with that. 4 years on, it was difficult. We found the mountain, and then we began to climb. I'd never climbed a mountain before, so I thought it'd be easy. Turns out it's not. So after a couple of hours and a few slips, it was starting to get increasingly more dangerous. It was time to think, do I get to the top and perhaps risk dying for the sake of this magical moment, or do I quit? And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, at that point in time, I decided to quit. But I still asked my girlfriend to marry me. She said yes. We drove down to Vegas, we got married. We toured around America for a couple more months, then headed back to the UK. But that idea of quitting still stuck in my mind. Quitting just because I couldn't see just didn't seem acceptable. I always felt that I could adapt, I could achieve anything, and I'd quit. So one day, bored, sat on my sofa, I thought, what can I do? How can I go out there and do something and push the boundaries? As the video said, I owned a pair of shoes, so I thought, why don't I go out and see if I can run? So behind my house, there were some football pitches. So I used to position myself between the goalposts and just run up and down the field. Around the same time, I was using an app on my phone called Runkeeper, which gave audio feedback. So for the first time ever, I could know things like distance and pace, which was great. It was really cool. I was out there doing it by myself, and I managed to run 1 mile. And 1 mile served as a great distance. I'd never run that far alone before, and it was great. There was just one problem. It was starting to become a little too dangerous. It was the dog walkers. They assumed I could see. I assumed they would move. It was time to find somewhere new to run. So I persuaded my wife that she could drive me to a closed road. Because I live near an airport and they haven't finished the infrastructure, so the roads are closed at both sides. Cars can't come down. I thought, this is perfectly safe. I can just run up and down. This will be great. So my wife dropped me off, and there was double yellow lines. So that was quite easy because I could feel underfoot the yellow lines and make sure I was running along the lines. If you moved too far to the left, you'd lose the line, so I knew to drift back. Too far to the right, you'd touch the curb so you could easily cut in. And I was still using Runkeeper. And it was around this time I really started to notice that whenever I ran over some grades, Runkeeper would say I'd run 0.3 miles. And with this idea, I thought, maybe I could pair what it feels like underfoot with the distance markers from Runkeeper and learn to run. So one day, my wife dropped me off, and I began to run up and down the road to build up the confidence. Stepped out onto the dual carriageway, followed the yellow lines, and just ran down the road. I did tell myself the cars would move. Thankfully they did, like the video said. Got to the bottom, and I burst into tears. I was overcome with emotion. I couldn't believe that I'd achieved this. I was running on the open road. It was no longer the football pitch. It wasn't a closed road. This was a real road with traffic. But I knew one thing. I needed to get back to the closed road before my wife found out. Quickly ran back. She picked me up, and then for the next few weeks, slightly deceptively, I began to learn to run the open road. And what that entailed was learning what it felt like underfoot and pairing that with the distance on Runkeeper. So, for example, some parts of the pavement were quite heavily cambered, which means you have one foot lower than the other. So you always know which side of the pavement you're on, which was great. That made that quite easy. And then there were certain sides where it was banked by grass or banked by bush. But the obvious problem was road signs and lampposts. You have to learn where they are by running into them. And then you don't make that mistake the second time. You remember where it was. The only exception was traffic cones, road cones. They're at quite an unfortunate height for me. And people moved them, so I'd remember where they were one day and make sure to avoid it, only to hit it because it had been moved over there. That was always a challenge, remained a challenge. So I'd managed to, at this point, get a 3-mile route down. So I could run 3 miles there, 3 miles back, which was great. So it was time to tell my wife. I was quickly banned from running. Never allowed out. But she quickly realised that me moping around the house was far worse than letting me go out. So after a short while, she relented and agreed to take me back out to the road. So now it was time to really run. So I was running this road, and I'd reached a distance of 10 miles. 10 miles was 10 times further than that 1 mile on the football pitch. And that 10 times perhaps got stuck in my head a little bit too much, because I went home and I entered a 100-mile race. I now had 6 months, in fact slightly less than 6 months, to train to run 100 miles. To slightly make it more complicated, I made this decision the week my son was born, the week I started university. So I figured if I can do it while I'm doing all this, I'll be a true athlete. So I started to train incredibly hard, and that would involve literally collapsing on the road, having to make a call to my wife, going, "Oh, I'm injured, can you come get me?" That never went down well. She would find me, but I'd be banned for running for a day or so. But I really pushed. I pushed and pushed and pushed. I'd collapse on the road, I'd collapse at home from exhaustion, but I couldn't quit. I never wanted to quit again. So I was coming up to the run. It was around 6 weeks out. And I decided that the way I could run this 100 miles was with a team of guides. And I'd put these guides on bikes, I'd just run next to them. It'd be great, could easily cover the 100 miles. So I used a series of friends. What I didn't think about was how prone my friends were to injury. They all became injured 6 weeks away from the race. Not wanting to quit, I thought I'd just go on Twitter and just ask if anyone was willing to help. I put out one tweet. In 3 days, I had 20 strangers willing to come and help me run 100 miles. So 6 weeks later, I turned up to the race in the Cotswolds. And for people who've been listening quite closely, I trained in a pancake flat airport. I went to run in the Cotswolds. For people not in England, that's really hilly. I didn't know that. I couldn't see the elevation map when I entered the race. I assumed it was flat, just like home. So I began the race. Everyone kept telling me the hills would end. Never truly believed them. I got to around 50 miles, and I broke down. The pain was incredible. The emotional fatigue was insane. Again, I found myself crying. So I sat down, and I thought to myself, can I quit? Can I just stop now? I've got to live with this forever. I would have to live with the thought of quitting again. And I told myself I couldn't do that. I told myself the only way I could stop was through failure. And the only way to fail is if you can't stand. So I stood back up, and I carried on running. 33 miles later, I could no longer stand, and I was removed from the race. But in around 6 months, I'd gone from nothing, not even been able to run alone, to running 83 miles in an incredibly hilly destination. But it didn't stop there. Thank you for the applause. That's very kind. I decided to continue to compete. So I entered things like 5Ks. 5Ks are brilliant. You can just go out, you can run. It's great, you get to go out. But I also entered lots of different distances, 30Ks, 50Ks, half marathons, trail races, things like that. But the one thing that was missing was a marathon. To this day, I've never run a marathon. But there was only one marathon I ever wanted to run, and that was New York. This year, I was fortunate enough to gain entry to New York. And New York is tantalizingly close to Boston. Boston is the home of Runkeeper that made this possible. If it wasn't for their app, I would never have begun to run. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to run from Boston to New York, then run the marathon? To make it slightly more interesting and slightly more fun, wouldn't it be great if I didn't even take a guide? I could just go out with my phone, no accommodation, no guides, and see if I can get from Boston to New York using social media. So the idea is on Saturday, I fly out to America. I will use Twitter to get from Boston to New York. Everyone can follow along at boston2nyc.com. As I said in the video, I'm going to be using Google quite a lot Google has quite a lot to stream the event, document it. There'll be live GPS tracking, and I'm going to get from one city to the next and then compete in the marathon. But that's what's possible right now. That's what's possible in 1 week's time. But what really interests me is what's possible next year. What's possible the year after. Hopefully, new technology will arrive. I'll be able to use glass in unique ways and do even greater things. And the one thing that's on the radar for the next 12 to 18 months is to compete solo. While I've trained solo, I've never competed solo. And I feel there is a place on earth that a blind man can run alone, and that place is the desert. So the idea is to use technology to run across the Sahara in a race against sighted people to see if I can beat them using technology. I think that is definitely possible because it's a waypoint race, which means you're given GPS coordinates. So all I need to do is stay in a heading, keep on running, and beat everybody else. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.